Now, therapeutic help or help from an other can be extremely valuable, or it can cost a lot of money to make things worse. So if it's fear about judgment and what other people will think, therapy can make that worse if you deal with a typical therapist who may be as judgmental as average and tell them all the things that most people judge. And now you've got a new person to judge and criticize you. It can be very useful to have a witness and another set of eyes when dealing with things that are too overwhelming for you to look at and talk about. So that can be very useful. And it can be very useful to spend time with someone, a therapist or otherwise, who loves the part of you that you're dealing with better than you love yourself and can model how to treat yourself well. Now, this is one of the best uses for a therapist because it's very difficult for a friend to treat you better than you treat yourself for very long, because when we treat ourselves in a certain way, we're embodying a deep belief that that's how we deserve to be treated. Now, if we believe that, we can convince almost anyone to treat us that way. But it can be harder to pull a therapist into that because they've got a 1 or a 2 hour window of time, and they've got a training kit to help guide you to learn to treat yourself better in that domain. And what I mean by in that domain is, let's say that you've got an alcohol addiction. And what we know from traumatic literature is that all addiction is pain management. And usually addictions deal with trauma. And in our culture where we don't deal with trauma, the substance addiction is a diversionary mask to cope with the fact that we don't know how to deal with trauma because our culture doesn't know how to deal with trauma, so they haven't taught us. In fact, they've taught us to deny and suppress and control our feelings, which just makes the trauma worse. So if we understand that this is not our fault, we were born into a trauma-illiterate abuse cult. What else is new? This was not my decision. We have systematically eliminated all emotional literacy from the education protocol. Nothing to do with you. We have made sure that most of our parents know very little about parenting before they have children, particularly the first one. What else is new? Parental incompetence, systemically organized and unleashed on infants in their most helpless states. It's a recipe for stupidity, a recipe for disaster, and it's our cult's recipe. What to do? Well, one thing is to become an addict to manage pain that's too big to deal with. Well, the addiction is not the problem. The addiction is the solution to a bigger problem that the cult is not dealing with. Now, if you understand this technology scientifically, you can thank the addict in you for managing overwhelming feelings, but then you can learn from a therapist how to love and take care of those feelings better than the alcohol does. Thanks, alcohol, but the hangover afterwards, the messed up life, there's a downside. Let's do a better job by dealing with those feelings in this way, with those sensations in this way. And so you can learn to treat yourself better by watching how a therapist treats these very frightened, scared, traumatized parts of self. If they know how to love, if they are an adult, if they have dealt with their own childhood trauma, if they have a good kit in their tool bag, a trauma therapist or other therapist can bring adult love into the psychic matrix that you can then embody and learn and then take out into your life, getting rid of those people who refuse to treat you well, finding those people that treat you better. So this is, I think, how a therapist can help. And here are a couple of things that I think are good to look at. Video, if possible, of your therapist. And, a complimentary interview. How do you love the parts of yourself, therapist, that are most difficult to love? Well, if the therapist doesn't want to do that, and there are a lot of crappy therapists who do not know how to love themselves. In fact, you could even say some of them are voyeuristically watching their clients who have more guts than they do to talk about their feelings, which they won't talk about. So, there's a lot of mediocrity in many trades, and therapy is one of them. So you can try to find the top 5% of therapists that are willing to be vulnerable, are willing to care, are responsive to the goal of loving you and teaching you to love yourself better, and who understand that that's really their job. It's not to sit there and take notes. It's to teach you how to honor and love you better than anyone else has ever taught you. And anything that you can take away from that is phenomenal. But it's a very active process of caring about you.